life moves so fast, people don't really take the time out to have those nuanced conversations about life, love, and happiness because of the number of potential partners or access to the number of potential partners. Because the partners who were available and are available, it's probably always been the same, but now we have different kind of access into people from near and far. And so people, because of that access, people are less likely to want to negotiate anything. They want shit to fall into their laps. That isn't always the case. So, it's for people who are willing to just kind of slow things down just a little bit, they can have more in-depth and more intimate kinds of conversations with partners and potential partners.
I'm Cindy Darnell, and welcome to The Erotic Philosopher, the podcast where we examine and explore sex and relationships through social, cultural, political, and other lenses, and find some ways to explore some very diverse erotic quandaries. Welcome to the next episode of The Erotic Philosopher. Today's guest is Dr. James Wadley. Dr. James Wadley is the director of the sex therapy program for the Council of Relationships. As a scholar practitioner, he's a licensed professional counselor, a SECT certified sex therapist and supervisor, and maintains a private practice in the states of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. My discussion with Dr. James today is rich and fabulous. He's such a delightful guy. I'm really happy to share this with you. Enjoy. Thank you, James, for making time to join the Erotic Philosopher today. I really appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to talk about sex and pleasure and all these kind of fun things. And before we dive deep into some of your specialty topics, I have a question for you. I want to know, why did you decide to become a sex therapist?
I just kind of fell into the profession. So I went to undergrad at Hampton University. It's an HBCU down in Virginia, and majored in psychology because I knew I always wanted to talk to people about their problems. I used to spend a lot of time on the phone when I was a teenager, coaching people through their problems in high school. So when I went to college, I majored in psychology, thinking that was the best route to do it. It got up to my last year, and we had to do a senior research project, right? So my senior research project, I always wanted to do something with kids. And so my professor suggested, she said, James, why don't you do something on children's toy choices? Or basically, why do some boys play with trucks and why do some girls play with dolls, right? So that was my first introduction to gender roles and gender identity. And so I left Hampton University. I went to the University of Kentucky, and my concentration was in school psychology. Kentucky wanted me to work for a year before I went for my doctorate. And so I applied to schools up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and I found out that there was a human sexuality and education program at the University of Pennsylvania. And I was like, that's where I need to be. So I applied, I got in, and what was unique about that experience was that my friends were anything other than Black, middle-class, heterosexual, cisgendered, able-bodied Christians, right? I'll always be grateful to the people who had patience with my ignorance and who kind of took me under their wings to kind of show me or introduce me to folks who occupy different spaces and in communities.
Yeah, wow.
So it took me 6 years to finish my PhD in human sexuality education at the University of Pennsylvania. And the program was geared towards teaching and research around sexuality. And again, I always wanted to be a therapist. So I finished at UPenn in August 2001, and 2 weeks later, I started postgrad at Council for Relationships, Sir Thomas Jefferson. Postgrad there and finished, and I worked for any number of different community mental health agencies throughout Philadelphia. And then, I started my private practice, and it's evolved. The credentialing piece actually came through ASECT, where I was invited to become a part of ASECT because, hell, ain't no other Black dudes out there doing sex work.
Right. Well, it's very, very few. I've noticed that there is definitely a real absence of Black men in particular in this space.
So I went to the ASEC conference in Minnesota. I was looking around for other Black dudes around. And it was like 2 or 3. But then, I'm like, man, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
Why would I want to be in this space with a bunch of white folks and I don't have a chance to see people who look like me.
Right.
And not that I had any beef with anybody there. Everybody
Yeah.
was cool. Everybody was warm and great.
Yeah.
But I'm like, man, this is bullshit. So I spent some time in a special interest group with other people of color, and they spoke with a lot of conviction about how some white supervisors were taking advantage of them by charging them $250 an hour for supervision. So I felt some kind of way about it. And so I ended up working towards and getting my sex therapy certification credential. And then I worked towards getting my sex therapy certification supervisor credential.
Right.
And I got it. So my role in this space or in this community is to try to pull through other people of color who may not have had an opportunity to have a Black dude be their supervisor, but also help them get the credential that they need in order to reach whatever professional goals that they aspire to. But I think where some Black men, some people of color, or Black and brown folks, what's missing is the mentoring.
Right.
So when I spend time with my supervisees, I do a lot of mentoring with them because the field is entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
They may want to do something totally different than what I ever even thought about, but that they don't have the mentorship in order to get from point A to point B, then more likely than not, they end up falling through the cracks. So that's why I try to be as active as I possibly can.
Yeah, yeah. And so to that end, James, I'm curious about, what are some of the issues that you see around sex in particular? And I know we can't necessarily separate it from mental health entirely, but, they are quite distinct things, and they also complement each other, I guess, like bread and jam. You can eat them both on their own, but together they're fabulous too. What are the things that you see, that you feel are really pertinent to Black communities in particular, distinct from communities of color more broadly, that to Black communities that really kind of lights your fire? What is it that really gets you, juiced up when you think about the work that you do with these communities?
I'll share that. I mean, like nowadays, and I guess it's always been there. It is around survival. Like, how do you survive in this larger system when there's law enforcement violence, or when there are health disparities, or when there are all these media misrepresentations of what your life might be like. And then how do those larger structures or influences filter down into how intimacy and relationships are negotiated, maintained, and maybe even severed? And so for me, what lights my fire is that, we have, or at least some of the circles that I run in, we have nuanced conversations around these larger systemic issues and how those systemic issues impact individual relationships, individual functioning, sexual functioning, desire, fantasy, yada, yada, yada. So one of the things that I talked about the other day is that, we were talking about, I started talking about pornography, where I'll have clients who come in and they'll say that they watch pornography, fine, good, great, go for it. But then in the pornography that one is watching, if those pornographic images don't look like you or don't look like the partner you're spending time with, there may be some larger systemic issues that may be filtered in to how you view yourself and how you view what your fantasies and desires may be.
Yeah.
I.e., we can have a conversation about internalized racism, internalized white supremacy, and how that plays itself out in the bedroom.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, is this something that you see a lot of in your practice? Is that something that comes up a lot in your discussions?
Every day. Because, when my clients come in, most of my clients are Black and brown folks.
Right.
So when my clients come in, obviously they're coming in with their presenting issue. But then once we look at the presenting issue and then think about some of the larger systemic forces, then they have these aha moments like, oh yeah, well maybe this is one of the reasons why I do this. Oh yeah, maybe this is another reason why I do this.
And I mean, that actually fits in really well, James, with a letter that I have from one of our listeners about these kinds of issues. Would it be okay if I read that letter out to you right now?
Sure.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Dear philosophers, that's us, James. Let me start by saying I love the podcast. Thank you. I have a situation that I've been wrestling with for several years, and I thought that maybe one of the philosophers can help me out. I'm a light-skinned black man, educated and living in NYC. I mention my skin tone because my whole life I'm too black for white people and too white for black people. Over the years, I've been dating mostly white women. It's not that I don't like dating women of color. I generally have more in common with white women, which is what I discovered in college. It's also harder to find black women who are open to non-monogamy as I am. I'm cool with my dating choices, but my family are not, which makes it harder for me to consider making relationships any more than casual. My mum really wants me to date black women, and I wouldn't mind, but so far it hasn't happened. I realize it's my life and not hers, but I think about this a lot. So James, that's from Mr. B. Do you have any advice for Mr. B?
Yeah. When after hearing the letter, I was thinking about a few different things. Thinking about the issue of, or the challenges of colorism, and that sometimes people are judged based upon how light or how dark they are. And I was thinking about how skin tone, talking about having conversations about skin tone, it's because it's a value laden conversation. It is sometimes challenging that, as for me, as a fairly light skinned, bronze complected black man, I probably have more privileges than somebody who might be darker than me, right?
Mm-hmm.
May or may not,
Mm-hmm.
just guessing, right?
Right. Yeah.
Then he had mentioned that I was curious around what his understanding of code switching might be. Code switching is, in one group or community, I behave one way, and another community, I may behave in another way, and I need to be able to monitor those interactions that I have with either or both communities that I occupy at any one time. So for me, I can code switch by using the King's language, or I can use language that's more particular to the community that I may have emerged from, by maybe dropping the ending of my words or saying, look, how are we going to get this done? Right. So I'll use more of a relaxed or informal language. So he had mentioned that he was too black for white people and too white for black people. But then I would invite the person to think about, who are the people you're spending time with? Because people make the assumption that black people are a monolith and white people are a monolith. And that, so if I'm hanging out with black people, if I'm hanging out with white people who think that I'm too black, then maybe you need to hang around some more white people who have a more relaxed connotation of what it means to be black or be themselves. So it doesn't matter how you present yourself.
Yeah.
And then if you're too white for black people, what kind of black circles are you running in? Because that assumes that all black people believe that speaking the King's English or language has to be white acting. And so we know that blackness and whiteness can be based upon a continuum, and that in the circles that he runs in, he might just have to think through how he positions himself in those circles.
Yeah.
Then over the years, he says, I've been dating mostly white women. Why? When, and maybe, I don't know this man from a can of paint, I would imagine that none of the white women look like this man's mama.
Right.
So what is the relationship that he has with his mama or his daddy or with both, and or what is the relationship that he has with his blackness? How do you celebrate your blackness when you're around white folks all the damn time?
Yeah.
What is that about? And then for white women you spend time with, how do they celebrate your blackness? Do you talk about it or not? So then he says, I don't like dating women of color. I just like generally having more in common with white women. Why? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of sisters or black or brown women who have the same interests as he does, and probably run in the same damn white circles that he runs into. But because he's so fixated on white women, he doesn't even look at the sisters or the women of color who are out there. Then he says, I'm cool with my dating choices, but my family are not. Probably not, because they don't look like your family, which makes it harder for me to consider making relationships any more than casual. So then he dates the white women. He keeps them casual. So for me, then they become disingenuous because he may be with them just because he feels comfortable with them, but he has no plan on developing a long-term
Yeah, so
relationship.
he's keeping really everything at a distance. He's keeping all of the racial dynamics at a distance. He's keeping the intimacy at a distance. He's really keeping everything way outside where, I guess, where he can handle it for
Yeah.
now, at least.
And he's got, my mom really wants me to date a black woman. I guess so. Because a black woman probably looks like her. I guess so. He told me about he wouldn't mind. Like he's doing some community service, but so far it hasn't happened. I mean, you got to be intentional about it, buddy. Come on now. I realize it's my life, not hers, but I do think that this is a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. And you know, if you're a black man who wants to date white women, brown women, black women, whoever, I mean, that's fine. That's your choice. But make
Yeah.
sure you thought through why you're doing what you're doing, which is probably why he reached out to you, Cindy, or the philosophers on this podcast, because he's
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
to have a different. He wants to have a different conversation with himself. Ultimately, have a
Right.
different kind of conversation with his partner or partners, or maybe even his family. So, to the person who sent that letter in, thank you so much for inviting this conversation, and I'd be curious to learn more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I certainly, I mean, the when folks send in letters like this, I mean, there's my expertise obviously only goes so far, and it's about being able to have a much richer discussion, and it's about stuff also that is complicated and complex, and so many
Right.
of the issues that you raised, James, are, these things that really they just transcend fucking. Fucking is only one part of sex. And sometimes it's the least interesting part.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what, Cindy? I'm sorry. I skipped over this line. I just generally have more in common with white women, which I discovered when I was in college. It's also harder to find black women who are open to non monogamy as I am.
Mm.
So then maybe he is having conversations about what non monogamy might mean. And I wonder if the conversations that he's having with black women, if they're focused on just fucking,
Yeah, right.
or if in fact he's looking for a relationship that's non-monogamous where he can extend his authentic self to, I don't know, black woman or whoever, black or brown woman, and then
Yeah.
be open to that person extending her authentic self to him. And I guess I'm assuming he's cis hetero black
Yeah,
man.
I'm assuming that
So
too.
it's those kinds of conversations that need to continue to be had. But if he's looking to experience a different part of himself, I would be curious how he would respond to if he did come across a black woman who is open to
Mm.
non-monogamy and is okay with him being just who he is,
Yeah,
because they're out.
right, right.
They are
They've got
out.
to be out there. They're out there everywhere. That's so
Right.
important. And so one of the things, James, that you mentioned to me in our correspondence about doing this podcast, and this really fits into Mr. B's letter here about intimacy negotiation, and then what you were calling the continuum of intimacy and arousal, and
Mhm.
where you're talking about, where, and of course we are making assumptions. We only have what Mr. B told us about his situation. There's a whole lot more that, you and I are not privy to. But based on this tiny little snippet that we have, in terms of intimacy negotiation, what are some of the things that you think are especially important for folks to reflect on, whether they're monogamous or not, whether they're black or not? What are some of the things that really stand out to you and get you fired up when you're thinking about that?
I think one of the things that people assume when they meet somebody is that they assume that people have the same emotional and relational skill set as they do. That when you meet somebody, he, she, or they they're fine, they're hot, they're attractive, they're striking, they're gorgeous, they're whatever. And so we have a conversation about life, love, and happiness, and it's probably superficial or maybe it's in depth, fine. But then when the shit hits the fan and I'm over at your house or you're at my house, and then I see that, I don't know, you got streaks in your drawers, I'm like, what the fuck, right? And you're like, James, what the fuck? And so I want to talk about your thoughts. I want to talk about your feelings. I want to talk about, why you did it, or if you need some extra toilet tissue in the bathroom or whatever, and how that might impact your fantasies and your desires. If you tell me that you're into coprophilia, then that's your thing. But if you're not, then all right, we can talk about it. But so some people don't have the same emotional and social skill sets as partners may want. And then when I guess the proverbial little boy gets hit until the stop sign goes up, when we have those conversations and we're butting heads, I'm thinking that you're processing and can process these nuanced conversations.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people don't, because we're different. And we're bringing not only different skill sets and different competencies, but we're also bringing in our culture into the equation.
And I think, one of the things that really sort of stood out to me about what you're saying here is this understanding of, competencies and being able to understand that not everybody is on the same page. How would you advise people to practice increasing their capacity if they notice that either they fall short in some way, or they're dating someone whose range is much higher, or the person who's in that higher range needs to be able to accommodate someone who's perhaps not negotiating at the level they are? What advice would you have for folks navigating that kind of complex terrain?
So with any relationship, I do believe that there has to be a lot of patience and a lot of compassion, because I can have a nuanced or higher level conversation about sex and sexuality and intimacy, but then when it comes to, say, money management or finance management, I may really struggle, because that may be a trigger for something that I may have experienced in the past or whatever. So for my individuals and couples, we talk about patience and compassion and understanding, and the extension of grace, in that partners may not have the same emotional or relational skill set as you do. And I think if people can kind of slow things down and be open to having many conversations and a variety of conversations around the same issue, they find themselves bumping heads less often than they would if they weren't open to extending compassion and grace and patience and understanding and empathy towards their partner's experience.
Yeah. And I think that really is so fundamentally important, that we can find that compassion and grace, which it seems to be, I don't know, I mean, in my experience, it seems a little harder to find these days than perhaps it should be. Do you observe that that's something that is less in abundance than it could be?
Yeah, I think so. Because life moves so fast, people don't really take the time out to have those nuanced conversations about life, love, and happiness. Because of the number of potential partners, or access to the number of potential partners, because the partners who were available and are available, it's probably always been the same, but now we have different kind of access into people from near and far. And so people, because of that access, people are less likely to want to negotiate anything. They want shit to fall into their laps. And that isn't always the case. So, it's for people who are willing to just kind of slow things down just a little bit, they can have more in-depth and more intimate kinds of conversations with partners and potential partners.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, the practice of slowing down is so crucial to connection and to good sex, and that we tend to fall into this narrative, especially around sex, that hard and fast is better. And hard and fast is great for those who are into it, but it's only one way to engage erotically. It's only one way to experience sex, which, when that's all we know, and often if we're driven to that place because of anxiety, to actually slow down long enough to sit with the discomfort of connection, it can be really challenging for folks, huh?
Yeah, I can be intimate with you, but still be disconnected with you.
Yeah.
I'm having hard and fast sex.
Mm-hmm.
So we do it for what, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. Maybe both of us climax, and then I say, all right, well, what's for dinner? I can get out of bed, or I don't know, off the table, or off the chair, or off the thing, or off the carpet, or out of the car, or whatever.
Right. And then it's over.
And it's over. Right. See you the next time.
Yeah. Even if there is a next time. And that's the thing. I mean, often, one of the questions that I often ask my clients, and I'd be curious to hear what you think about this, James. I ask them, why do you have sex? And I find it such a pertinent question, because often people are taken aback by that question because they've never thought about it. Why do we do it? And because the default that we, assume, or certainly back in the olden days, and I think to a degree a lot of people still in the present will say, well, sex is for making babies, right? But of course that's not why most people have sex. Yeah. And then we stop and think, well, why do we do it? And in my experience, there are two main reasons that people say to me in my practice. They'll say it's for pleasure and connection, but often they're not the things that folks focus on while they're in the middle of doing it. They're thinking about everything except that. Is that something that you've observed in your practice?
Yeah, that. So to that point, sometimes people only view sex as vaginal, anal, or oral contact. And once I frame it as, what does sexuality mean to you, then it becomes less genitally focused and more expansive, where they're not only thinking about sexual play, but they're also thinking about talking or intimacy or being vulnerable. And they're including their affective, their cognitive, and their behavioral response while they're with one or however many partners they may be spending time with. They have a chance to consider their conceptions around masculinity, or maybe constructions around gender, or even femininity, and the learnings or competencies that they have around negotiating themselves in any number of different contexts.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for me, I would say, all right, what does sexuality mean to you? And then if it tended to focus on one's genitals, I'd say, all right, well, what else you got? Who are you besides your penis or your vulva? So where's this going? So oftentimes they only bring their penis and their vulva or whatever to any sexual interaction with their partner. And as you know, we try to invite them to think more expansively.
And with that expansion comes a whole range of new possibilities, feelings, sensations, thoughts, and abilities. And this is something even, working with people who don't have long-term partners who are having casual sex, maybe not now because of COVID, but that it's still possible to have those kinds of interactions even if you're not in long-term partnerships, which I think, a lot of people tend to miss that part, that, they drop their pants and then they drop their manners as well. And I have always thought it doesn't need to be that way. And I wonder if it's because of a collective discomfort with sex in general, that, what drives us to have perhaps casual encounters with no intention of taking it any further, that somehow collectively we've sort of also conflated that with, well, because I'm never going to see this person again and it's just sex, that phrase, just sex, means that sometimes we can kind of get away with, despicable behavior because being able to be present with what we're doing is too confronting.
Yeah, and hearing you say that, I was thinking about whether the cessation of the relationship is negotiated before or after sex, or is it something that's just assumed? So if
Ah.
I say to you, look, we're only going to have sex one time, and I got 1 hour that's carved out for us to have sex. And after that, I'm never going to see you again. I'm never going to call you again. I'm never going to text you again. So in this 1 hour, I'm hoping that you can live a lifetime of sexual experiences of anything and everything that you ever wanted to happen in this 1 hour. And then the person says, okay, I got an hour for you. Let's do this.
Yeah, right. Right.
And when the whistle blows and the clock strikes 12, I
Mm.
know that I have to get home because my stagecoach will turn into a pumpkin, and I'll probably lose my shoe on the way out the door. I'm out. That's it.
That's it.
And then
There it is.
we never lay eyes or communicate again, if and only if you don't find my lost shoe. And then in which case you would have to search the entire kingdom to come and find me. And then I'll gladly welcome you back in my arms.
Wow. And there it is. There's the romance novel right there, huh? That's how it all starts. And this is the thing. I mean, you were talking before about, about porn and images that we see of ourselves or not, as it were, and how we're depicted, whether we're older, whether we're black or white or Asian, or whether we're fat or whatever, all of the variations that has become a thing, that anything other than quote unquote normal has become a fetish. So you've got a fat fetish or a MILF fetish, or a BBC fetish, or or whatever it is, that there's this kind of implied normal, which is young and thin and white, I guess, and then everything else, which is really everybody else, is this extra thing that tends to not necessarily fit into an erotic narrative. And I mean, the reason that I got onto that is because we tend to, without sex education, and because your PhD's in sex education, without sex education, we are led through these stories of sex that we get growing up, either through romance, movies, and even fairy tales, Cinderella and what have you, or through porn. And, when our sex education comes either through Hollywood or through porn or fairy stories, we end up with quite a skewed set of expectations about what sex and relationships can look like.
So hearing you say that fairy tale or skewed representation buys into the letter that you read about the guy
Yeah.
eroticizing, maybe fantasizing, and only desiring white women, because maybe that's all. Even though he may have grown up in a black household, he may have only seen images of white women growing up, and in which case he desired them because that's what was on TV or that was what was in the media,
Yeah.
and so now he feels as if he can only be with white women, and obviously to the chagrin of his mom.
And yeah, these things they start at such a young age, and they really, they influence so much of what we do and say. And then even as adults, where we have consciousness, we have free will, it still permeates everything that we do until we stop and spend some time sort of really thinking about this stuff, huh?
Yeah, and I'm hoping that, with the guy, he, thinks about his letter and thinks about, kind of what you and I were talking about, and then be open to having this kind of conversation with his white partners, and be open to
Yeah.
having this kind of conversation with his black or brown mom, and then be open to having this conversation with any black women who he may come into contact with. Who you can say, well, hey, I'm feeling this, 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 this. Is this always true, or is this only true in the experiences that I've only
Mm. Mm. And there's so much opportunity for growth and development there if one is willing, I guess. He's going to have to take a risk and really put himself out of his comfort zone a bit to be able to extend himself to create this new relationship with his own sexuality for himself, and then I guess by association with others.
What's amazing is that you move out of your comfort zone, inviting him to move out of his comfort zone, and maybe his comfort zone is in his own internalized whiteness or white supremacy, when he really needs to go back to his comfort zone and be comfortable in his black or brown skin.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this. So, James, before we sort of start wrapping up, is there anything in particular that, is really kind of firing you up and charging you up right now that you'd like to talk about?
Oh my gosh, I'm always fired up. I'm always charged up. I can talk about sex all day long. I'll just talk about some of the projects that I just completed. So I just completed my chapter for a book by people of color who are sex therapists. And my chapter is called Black Like Me, Reflections of a Black Certified Sex Therapist and Supervisor. And I have a chance to talk about some of the experiences that I had shared earlier. Then in this latest iteration of my journal that came out, we're actually celebrating our 7th year of production.
And so tell us about the journal for folks who, obviously, if they can't see this, but they're hearing this.
So yeah, I kind of flashed it up really fast. So the Journal of Black Sexuality and Relationships came out of my academic experience at UPenn, where if I wanted to find articles that address the convergence of race and sex, there was no journal that represented that. So I was all over the damn place, right? Fast forward a few moons later, I was on a flight between Philadelphia and Dallas, and I had started to put together a proposal on Black sexuality. And in the spirit of what Robert Staples had done, as well as what Juan Battle and Sandra Barnes had done, and others. And so, I don't know, I didn't want to do a book. I wanted to do something that was more enduring. So I could kind of fly by the seat of my pants, no pun intended for your listeners. So I ended up putting together a proposal for several different publishers to have a journal where people could contribute their scholarly articles to that focused on the experiences of persons of African descent and the sexual experiences of persons of African descent. So University of Nebraska Press came back with the best offer. They were like, good, great, go for it. And then I kind of scrambled around. They were like, all right, who's on your editorial board? And I was like, oh shit, I don't have anybody on my editorial board, but give me a couple of weeks and I'm going to find some folks. So I found some folks on my editorial board, and it was ready, set to go.
Amazing.
So put together a call for manuscripts, and we had a nice number of manuscripts to come down the pike, and 28 issues, and 7 years later, here we are.
How often does it come out?
It comes out quarterly, and you know what? Here, I'll share I'll share the titles of the manuscripts for this issue. So this is volume 6, issue 4. So we got Bussinismus, an introduction to pleasure, pain, and power and politics of bottoming by Patrick Grant. And what's interesting about this particular article or this particular manuscript is that there are a few studies that have been done on Black men who bottom. Then I got I Want to Feel Enlightened by You, Black Professionals' Preferences in an Ideal Partner. That's by Chesmore Monteith and Candace Hargens. Both of them are out of the University of Kentucky. Black Men Who Have Sex with Transgendered Women. Self-Understandings of Sexual Desire and Sexual Orientation. That's by Andre Key and Latoya Brooks. Sexual Variety and Sexual Satisfaction in Black Women. Findings from a U.S. probability sample of women aged 18 to 83. That's by Ashley Towns, past president of ASEC, Debbie Herbenek, Brian Dodge, and Molly Rosenberg. And the last article is Herbert Liegard, Libido, Black Women's Decreased Desire, and Self-Medicating Reaction, Workplace Bullying. And that's by Leah Hollis. And then there's also a book review by Zenling Lee, Black Masculinity and Hip Hop Music, Black Gay Men Who Rap, by Huntley Brown. So
wow, that is a fabulous cross-section of stuff. Congratulations, James. That's just such a wonderful project for you to have, spearheaded, and 7 years later that there's titles like that coming out of it. It's Really fabulous. I noticed that a couple of months ago, I think it was, you had made it was accessible to people who didn't have access to an academic library. Is that still how it is, or?
No, and I don't have
No.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I will share that Project Muse has made available the first 3 years or the first 12 issues of the journal.
Yeah.
What they did when everyone was quarantined was that they made the entire collection available to everybody.
Right.
With 27 issues at the time.
Yeah.
And so if folks wanted to get access to the journal, they could merely Google Journal of Black Sexuality and Relationships, and they'll find it through Project Muse.
James Wadley, it was such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, this kind of popped up, and I had some free time, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go on Cindy's show and talk about life, love, and happiness. So I'm in.
I really appreciate it. If folks want to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
You can find me at drjameswadley.com, which is my website.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can find me at PhDJamesW on Instagram and Twitter. You can also find me at www.theabsc.com, the Applesberry Santa Claus, which is the Association of Black Sexologists and Clinicians. We do have our spring roundtable series coming up in St. Thomas. And so we're accepting proposals at this time. So yes, we're going to do the quarantine. And I figured, why be quarantined at my house in Philadelphia when I could easily get my ass on a plane and be quarantined at the beach in St. Thomas, and we can still have the same kind of intellectual exchange. So at the HBC.com, and also if the quarantine is lifted, I'll see everybody in Santa Marta, Colombia in October. You can also find me at www.thejbsr.com, and that's for the Journal of Black Sexuality and Relationships. And obviously you can find me at my host institution, which is lincolnuniversity.com. And I'm also director of the sex therapy program at Council for Relationships here in Philadelphia.
Goodness, there's a lot of stuff there. I'm going to put some of those links in the show notes for people to be able to to get hold of you. There's like a bazillion
Google
things
you've
got going on. I am thrilled that you're able to have time to talk to me today with all of that stuff that you've got going on. So
yeah, just Google me, folks. You'll find me. I'm there. You can reach me.
I appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. James as much as I enjoyed facilitating it, and make sure to look up the links in the show notes for ways to follow up with Dr. James yourself if you have more that you would like to explore with him. If you're enjoying The Erotic Philosopher, please help us out by leaving us a review. Your reviews help us reach more people, and that's really what we want to do. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Erotic Philos. That's The Erotic PHILOS. Head on over to my website, cindydarnell.com, where you can find the podcast link to leave your quandary for the erotic philosophers to ponder, and also catch up on any episodes that you've missed. From there, you'll also find ways to work with me individually or in relationships, and my online pleasure school with a suite of online classes ready for you to take at home. Thanks for listening.